Kenneth Hopkins. We spoke to him before. He has a new book on Amazon, UFO Girl, military intelligence story. Make a comment on Spotify, and should you want to speak to us, send us an email at spacecap13@gmail.com. Here we go. And we're talking to Kenneth Hopkins about his new book, UFO Girl. And furthermore, I'm very curious at some point, amongst telling about everything you want to about the book, explain the three-dimensional Kenneth.
There's a Kenneth personality. Well, actually, we're very confused because he speaks through mediums.
Okay.
So there's a lot of question that Kenneth is not a personality, he's a soul.
Okay.
Because he can speak to a medium and I can ask questions and he can answer.
Okay, so I see. And how are the two of you connected?
Well,
are you?
The abductions, Kenneth took over. They would become blackouts for me.
Oh.
So the missing time that occurred was with Kenneth taking over. And then Kenneth was in cooperation with the Greys.
Okay.
So with the women that were abducted, Kenneth would take them to the ships and I would black out.
Wow. Okay.
And so Kenneth had developed a relationship with the first agent, and I'm unaware of what that relationship was about. I hit upon it when she meets him in a car when I go to sleep. Okay. And she speaks with him. That's in this first book. She discovers Kenneth. She, I believe, was hired to find Kenneth because in the first book, the military saw the abduction of Kenneth and a girl from Etiquette Junior College. And this was in Wenham, Mass. And Kenneth locked them in their cars because he was afraid they would intervene. Kenneth has been like a protector, in a sense. So after they witnessed the first girl's abduction, they questioned us, I and the girl that was abducted.
Okay.
I thought we had gone to the movie and come back from the movie and then parked. But as it turned out, we never went to the movie. So when they were questioning us, both the girl and I responded that we had gone to a movie. The Greys are great at creating screen memories.
Mm-hmm.
So they created the same screen memory in me as they did the young woman.
Okay.
So then the military started questioning us, and they realized we didn't know what they witnessed. So then they hired a young girl to observe me and watch me. I was working in a top secret facility in Wenham. It was GTE Sylvania doing military contracts. And during the top secret process, they had followed me. And that's when they witnessed the abduction of the young woman and myself. So they approached both of us. After they approached the young girl 2 weeks later, she would not go out with me anymore. So I assumed they talked to her about what happened. So that was the one so they brought a young woman in to observe me. And they set me up to go out. Inadvertently, they set me up in a way I didn't realize to go out with her. And so that's what UFO Girl Military Intelligence is about her.
Okay.
She was out of the MK Ultra project. She had a cerebral implant. In the series of abductions, the Greys would be concerned about the implant. These were implanted in children at 6 in 59, 60, 61, or thereabouts.
Did you receive one? I forget this part.
No, there's no evidence of me having one, but there seems to be evidence of a close friend having one.
Okay. And the Greys become interested because why?
The Greys, of course, this caused convulsions, violent convulsions in this young girl.
Okay.
Requiring several ambulances, police, and everything, a period of stabilization, and this became concern of the Greys. Kenneth, I believe, brought the Greys into further evaluation of the girl. So in a 16-hour missing time period, the Greys showed me the implant in her head. They disassembled her. They showed me the implant in her head and asked me if I knew what it was about, and I didn't. So the Greys had concerns with the implant with the young girl. So they, I believe, removed it. In this book, man looks worse than the aliens or the Greys do. So they managed to remove it from her, and then they did the operation while we were at a lake. They froze everybody. They took her and me out on the beach. And then it seemed from the memories that they took something from me when they were removing the cerebral implant. It was about the size of my thumb. It connected to her brainstem. So,
and it's a military implant, is what?
MK Ultra.
Yeah.
The CIA was doing these projects.
Yes.
And Jose Delgado, there was some question. He was involved in the designing of these. He denies that he didn't do any work for the CIA. But around the time he was doing the experiments with implants, he was known famously for stopping a charging bull with a button.
Wow. Oh.
So he made national news, stopping the bull with the button. And so the Greys, I believe, removed the implant. And then
what becomes of her?
What?
What becomes of her then?
So they return her and us back to the beach, and she wants to swim across the beach, across the lake.
To get away? To get away for escape?
No, she just wants to swim across.
She just wanted to do that. Okay.
Great swimmer. She starts to have convulsions crossing the lake.
Oh, gosh.
6 hours swimming across this lake, about a little over a quarter mile. The Greys, there would be a conflict between Kenneth and the Greys because the Greys wanted her to drown quietly in the lake. They felt the work they had done had failed.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
A military helicopter responded, but it didn't see us, and then it drove away. So I had bits and pieces in the regressions on the military helicopter approaching the lake, and then I was looking out of a window on the Grey's ship when I saw the helicopter coming at a distance, but it never saw the Grey's ship. So 6 hours was lost crossing across the lake, and then, of course, we decided to walk back. But in that 6 hour period, she appeared dead. I was trying to carry her across the lake, but I couldn't. And so most of her was underwater when I was trying to bring her to the other edge of the lake. And then suddenly she's alive yelling at me.
In the water? While you're...
We came to the shore.
And then she comes to.
And then she was dead. She was listless. Fluid dripped out of her mouth. And then suddenly, I don't know, missing time again, she's yelling at me because I started to talk about her going to a hospital because drowning can occur after the initial drowning. And so she's fighting violently against that. And So the lake incident and everything I wrote about it was stolen from my house. Most of the parts of this initial book were stolen from my house. I wrote this about 20 something years ago, and all the material for these two books was still taken in break ins. Eventually, so 20 years later, getting bits and pieces, the military has become a problem for me since this. 2.5 years ago, they beat me for breaking ribs, multiple ribs, and it's been a 2.5 year recovery. I found a witness in Canada who spoke with one of the men that had been kicking me. 3 men were directed by officers, and they were asking questions. And then they broke. So when I awakened that morning, I had 6 severed ribs on this side, fractured ribs here, fractured ribs here. So since then, my relationship with the military has become not good. They seemed to feel that the beating was justified. So this is a U.S. military group based in Canada.
Right. He said that we're working together nefarious style. We have a link, Canada and the US, but we do know it. But did somebody say to you that were trying to escape and that's why?
The guards that were beating me, that the woman spoke to, said I was trying to escape, but it was obvious, and that they pushed me onto a table. I was teleported from my home to this base in Ontario, and by the military, and then they started the torturing shortly after I arrived. So we went into hypnosis to reconstruct the torturing, and we found there was some concern with my wife. She's top secret United Nations. There's a lot of conflict going on with my marriage 4 years ago with the military. She is not an agent. She was randomly picked when I was on a dating service, one of 50. So there's no way. The agents are usually, they had introduced agents to me on several occasions, and they fooled me with it. But they're usually made more available at college. They were using a couple on me. Nancy being the first agent. The facility had me taking her home at night, and that began the introduction. I was fairly suspicious she was with intelligence, but when she started having the convulsions, then I kind of dismissed that she was with intelligence. Then I later find out when they shot her, 3 years later,
Right.
The MK Ultras are considered disposable by the United States military, the CIA. So her husband was her handler, and he put a bullet in her head, left her for dead. She survived to go into federal protective custody, and then she went into a home in Connecticut. I was trying several times to find out what the hell was going on when things weren't adding up about her. I believe Kenneth visited the area at the time of the shooting, and Kenneth was concerned that she was in danger. And upon his visiting the area, it seemed like that was around the time she was shot, 1981. They would later use her to watch me in the military, in the Navy. When I was stationed in East Boston, she and her husband would be working the same shift. So I was very confused with the relationship. And then things kind of quieted down. A homicide in Belchertown got the police looking at me suspiciously. I woke up one day with a hole in the back of my leg that looked like a bullet wound. Blood was all over the bed, all over the sheets. And I didn't know what had happened to cause that wound on the back of my leg. It bled and it had a giant scab on it, and it wouldn't heal for several months. So we did the regression. The Greys were furious that a man had been following me when a military ship abducted me. The military picked him up after they picked me up. Then they tortured him and then killed him. For some reason, the Belchertown Police Department must have met him, but I came under suspicion for his disappearance. And then on and off for several years. Belltown Police Department was following me, questioning me. They had my phones monitored. And I got my father, who was a selectman at the time. He talked to the selectmen of Belchertown, and he got them to stop the investigation the first time. They restarted another investigation. I was going to college at the time, never knew I was an abductee or a contactee, had no recollections of the blackouts. Sometimes you're
You
aware.
didn't find out until you were in your 50s, you told us originally. Yeah.
Yeah, about 2021
Wow.
was when I started putting these together. So I didn't even know I was a contactee. I tried to get help on the blackouts. The blackouts, 90% of them was with a woman.
With the woman, sorry, what was the last part?
There was a woman with me in 90% of the blackouts.
Okay.
And blackouts happened.
And always,
So with the 16-hour missing time was with the agent. And of course, she was aware something happened. I don't know what she knew of what happened. In 2008, I'd somehow end up connecting with her sister who was in hiding.
so is it?
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
So at the time I met the family, shortly before, the father was a high-ranking naval intelligence officer. He had been tortured in Long Island, and then the family was told he was dead. And then they were questioning the family, and then the family came under monitoring. And that's when I popped in to meet his daughter, Nancy, the agent. Later, years later, we would find out he wasn't killed. They put bullets in his legs. He lost both legs. We were told at the time, or the mother was told at the time, that they were putting bullets in his stomach. Died from that. So to me, it has always seemed like there was some kind of connection with what happened to her father. He had lately been promoted to an admiral of naval intelligence without his legs. The sister would find him. I don't know how she found him. So in 2008, I connected with the sister, and she gave me all the information on the family. And she was going to take me to see Nancy in Connecticut, in the place she was protected, federal protection. And so I was going to meet up with her. And then she changed the meeting to me meeting up with another man. And my family was kind of traumatized by these calls. I changed my mind. I would meet with her, but I would not meet with another man. And that was to be in Lynn. But the sister was always very honest to a fault. So she gave, and in the book, I have further interactions with her. So their house was burned down at that time. The people that were questioning the family, men in suits, kept asking about something connected to the house. And then a federal agency sets up for a meeting with me undercover. The military replaces me at that meeting, and I believe they used Kenneth at that meeting. All 3 people at that meeting disappeared. Their bodies weren't found. I went undercover with the federal drug enforcement to see if I could find his body. I went back to the town that I had ran from into the Navy. And they described me as being the killer, which didn't make any sense. So that's all I know on what happened. But the bodies there were 3 men involved. 2 of them were with the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency, and I don't know who the third one was. So when I just knew one of the guys had died. He was the one that invited him. So I took off. He said if anything happened to him, get the heck out of town. So I got out of the town, but I thought he was involved. He was working undercover on a drug organization. So he gave me information to disclose to the FDEA. That led to a major bust in the eastern area of the eastern area, Newburyport, Amesbury, Haverhill. They broke up. I gave distributions and processing places. So I assumed that was what the surveillance that was on me was. So through the military, I was under heavy surveillance with what I called white Cadillacs. So I was going for another top secret security clearance in the nuclear program. So my friends were getting frustrated with this white car showing up around us. So they direct me to Naval Intelligence because we were going for a top secret security clearance. So I met with Naval Intelligence on this vehicle. They were angry that it hadn't been reported earlier. And then he said he'd look into it. And then he got back to me. He asked me if I wanted a honorable discharge from the Navy. I said, no, I intend to finish my time in the Navy, so I thought it was strange. I got no answers. I went to the FBI. I got no answers. They brought the car in. They looked for trackers or devices on it. Some of this comes into the second, but a lot of the original stuff is in the first book. So all through the first book, I pretty much don't know what's going on.
Okay, hey, I got a quick question here, Kenneth. When you mentioned brain implants, you seem to suggest that this is U.S. government or CIA or somebody technology. And
yeah, in my research, when I had the regression, it made no sense to me. The Grey showing me this girl with electronics in her head. So it was my distrust of the hypnosis. I think I treated them like imaginary, but it allowed me to receive and understand what was going on. In 1960s, the CIA with Jose Delgado was designing these implants. I was not able to find out what their purpose was. I spoke to a physician who removed them in California. So they were initially created by the CIA in the MK Ultra projects, which I was involved in.
Yeah. Okay. So it had nothing to do with reverse engineering alien technology.
It was human technology.
Okay.
Devised by, I believe, Jose Delgado, who denies his work with the CIA.
And the one other thing, you said you were teleported to Montreal or somewhere in Canada.
In my books, you'll see pictures of teleportations.
Okay, and these are, again, not reverse engineered technologies?
These are ET technologies.
Okay, because I mean,
plasma teleportation is the process. MIT is probably the university that's done the most research into it. My physics professor identified this to me when I showed him the pictures. I could only use certain cameras for the pictures because it destroyed a lot of cameras. But they would plasma teleport me out of my room. Now, the ETs, the Palladians, use very similar technology. The Greys seem to use a different technology, which I haven't totally figured out. I've heard people describe them chasing them around their beds with a giant needle. But the Greys have never been my problem. The Greys have kind of been protectors. But the military and the torturing, that is a major problem. And they seem to be justified at it. This base, the witness, I decided to post the broken ribs on one of the Facebook sites. The woman recognized it and sent further photographs of x-rays back to me.
That were yours?
Yeah, from that base.
Okay.
And she also wrote a letter explaining how they told her that I was trying to escape.
Wow.
And she identified them as U.S. soldiers in the Canadian base.
Yeah, I've heard this before too, actually. Do you know, is there any relationship to like Camp Hero, Montauk?
Doesn't seem to connect with that methodology.
Okay.
The professor I was working with when I wrote the first book, he was familiar with the Montauk project. He was familiar with all of that. He was involved with military intelligence at the end of World War II, and he was transcribing in German to English the intelligence network in Germany, which would later be brought to U.S.
Paperclip. Project Paperclip.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
So I'm initially involved in a genetics program with the military.
Right.
And I've been trying to get further information on this. The Pleiadians because I kept asking, why the hell are you guys bothered? And the Pleiadians said, you were born amongst us.
Okay.
So I had a friend, I said, is there any genetics game with ETs and the military? And then the information, I got further information. The Pleiadians were utilizing the Greys to reproduce. The Greys had the technology, as they said. The Greys picked a military group to assist them with that, plus the cloning project that would come into So the military seems to feel they own me. And I have no issues with the Greys and the Pleiadians, but I didn't feel the torturing. As I explained to them, I would have answered their questions had they not tortured me.
Right.
But the replies we got were not good. That's all I can say. They seemed to feel they had the right to torture. And when I made initial contact, they dared me for making contact. How dare you contact us? So I believe I found the military.
Initial contact, what do you mean by that?
We contacted the military.
Okay.
For the breaking of the ribs. I didn't know the ribs were broken by torture until the regressions came. And a woman responded to the x-rays that I sent in Canada. She sent a copy of the x-rays from the Canadian base.
Right.
And she showed the exact breaks. In her report, she said, in speaking to the men, they said that I was trying to escape. Now, I've been teleported thousands of times. And the last thing I'm going to do is escape in an area I don't know where it is.
Right.
So I'm usually very compliant until I'm returned. And then returned from the torturing, 2 nights in a row, they tortured. I was...
were they trying... Sorry to interrupt. Were they trying, Kenny, to extract something from you? What did they want to know? Why? Why were they? Sorry, go ahead.
The information they were after they had concerns that my wife was with military intelligence with the UN. So they were torturing me over my wife's identity. And then they were torturing me, as was said, was punishment for releasing information on the homicides. That is in the book.
Okay, yes.
So it's been 2.5 years between major surgeries to get the ribs reconstructed. I just had the last surgery, and I'm going in for a small surgery because a bubble has formed. I'll be having that checked this week. So I do not wish to work with the U.S. military office that seems to feel, and they felt justified in the torturing. I told them in the communication, I give them whatever information they want. I also told them I'm applying for disability with the torturing they did.
How is that? And is that going to, I hope that works for you.
Well, we're going to see where I can go with it. I got a woman that spoke with the men that beat me. She sent the photographs from the base that the beating occurred in. Because after the beating, they took photographs. So I feel I have enough information to pursue further disability.
Right.
They said, go ahead, was their words.
Okay. Okay. Like, go ahead and try, or?
Yeah, go ahead and try.
Right. Okay.
So I'm in the process of going to the VA. The psychiatrists I saw, the psychiatrists and psychologists with the VA have been treacherous. They've not been compliant. They've worked against. So I had gone to a hypnotist who's worked very well in Vermont. And the psychiatrist I thought was going to help me investigate the situation. But she came back with the reply, oh, the ribs are broken with a cough. And it's obvious if the ribs were broken with a cough, there would have been ripping of muscles before the ribs broke. So with that lie, I asked to not see her again. So I've been hooked up with a civilian psychologist. The first civilian psychologist died 6 months after I started with her, very suspiciously. And then I'm working now with another psychologist who's been helping me a lot at bringing the memories and putting things together and looking for solutions. The military, when we found they've been installing devices in the house, and we located two of the devices. I showed their locations to the police department. To have the process started on those devices was going to be about $10,000. $5,000 for a retaining lawyer, and then another $5,000 for Granite Securities, which was the company I was going to use to go through the house and get the devices. So I couldn't afford it. So when my psychologist, Dr. Delmater, realized that we had a device, he immediately wanted the lawyer's name, which made me realize there's something wrong here. So I had, in another abduction, they had done surgery. They had replaced my left lung. My right lung had been replaced before. They're taking these parts from the clone projects.
Okay. So, I've heard stuff like that.
I don't know. So I was told for longevity by the Greys. The Greys did a lot of work on my spine. The MRIs disappeared at the facility, so I never got to see the MRIs. A lot of medical records just disappeared. But I'm glad to be working with a civilian psychologist now. Now we're going after answers. Now we're going after where I spent 7 years trying to do. To not deal with me, the military gave a diagnosis of delusion, which meant no treatment. When I showed them the surgical marks from the replacement of the lung, they told me that was self-induced. So when all this stuff was coming up, I was done with the military. The military wasn't going to help me. They were going to interfere. So then both the psychiatrists and psychologists retired at about the time I brought the wound on this side to their attention. And then a new psychiatrist came in. So I thought I could trust her, and I gave her all the evidence in a folder. And then when she saw the evidence in the witness statement, she took the folder. She wanted to know the hypnotist's name. Thank God, the hypnotist's name was quite common. But there seemed to be evidence that they were getting the regressions. Somebody in the military was getting the regressions. The hypnotist told me that her house had been broken into. So she had reason to believe they were recording the regressions that were taking place. They made no attempts to go after the tapes. They deleted several tapes from my laptop, so I didn't get to hear them. So they definitely didn't want me getting the information from the laptops. But the treatment with the psychologist and the hypnotist is going very well as we're bringing the personalities together, bringing them into a cooperative state.
Integration.
Yeah. Integration. And the personality they got during the torturing was the child personality.
Okay.
He didn't know what they were asking him, so that's why they did the torture. In the tape that was stolen, he explains how he neutralized the pain. I don't remember when I go under hypnosis. So he had neutralized the pain so it wouldn't hurt him. He left me as a child, which I also found common with many other contactees. There were severe beatings by my mother into unconsciousness. This brought on seizures. The Greys eliminated the seizures after time. But my mother had no recollection of the beatings. And
I'm sorry, was your mother performing the beatings?
Yes, she was doing them.
And she doesn't remember it. So
she had no memory, and this was common with several other ones I had interviewed.
Other abductees.
Yeah. With those in my age group, it seemed like childhood beatings were a part of the experience. And the MK Ultra does a dissociative process with beatings, or when they worked with me. The MK Ultra was done to me out of Boston Children's Hospital by a Dr. Vincent Perlow. At age 6, they put an IV in my arm and had me do things to a child. I do not see, and then the military utilized me on missions with teleportations.
Can you describe the mission?
They were basically killing people. I don't know what they were about. One of them, I was coming into a facility. I was actually 18, 19. I was coming into a facility with a group of other men. We were raiding the facility. The people in the facility were so terrified, the guy I approached jumped out of a window. That was one mission. The other mission, I believe, had to do with uranium, with the transporting of uranium. They had us go into a facility and shoot everybody in the facility. 2 of us.
And were they were all humans?
Yeah.
Yes.
The military with the MK Ultra had created a personality by the name of Brian.
Okay.
And they would trigger Brian. They would abduct and use Brian in the missions. So Brian started having problems with the missions. The gun jammed when he went to kill the second man. He put a bullet in him. He dropped. And then the gun jammed, and Brian had a tantrum and whipped it. So that seemed to stop the missions. That was 10 years ago. So I don't believe they're using me for missions anymore.
Gosh, so one of the parts of you was Brian?
Brian was his name. And,
Brian was...
Yeah, and often with the teleportations, there's a dissociation that occurs. And I was speaking with another intelligence officer. He was explaining me to how the EMFs can affect memory, because the women in the rooms that I was abducted from never awakened. So we assumed the EMF levels.
Oh, I see what you mean. While you were doing things that wouldn't wake them up.
When they teleported me, the EMF levels are incredibly high. They blew out the cameras. They blew out a lot of things. So and he said that the EMFs affect the brain. So it probably kept the women that were sleeping.
Okay.
But I also question whether it played a role in the dissociation that occurred. So in my first book, we photographed the teleportation. And
how do we get a copy of that book?
The first book, another publisher wants to redo. So the first book may be redone. I haven't signed an agreement on that one. I've signed an agreement on the sequel to the one we're talking about.
UFO Girl.
Yeah.
Okay.
UFO Girl Military Intelligence is under her name.
Yes.
So there's a second book to that. And the military's had a problem with these books. And I believe the break-ins are related to the books. They destroyed most of the books when they were written 20 years ago. So I'm glad to be getting this one out. The next one I expect is going slower than I thought. It's a lot longer than I thought. And that covers what happened in the military. So everything that I have seen that has been dark has been with the human side. The U.S., this group that was brought in the genetics program basically placed me into the MK Ultra projects, which are being, as I said, done out of Boston Children's Hospital, 62, 63. So I know there's a lot of missing memory with the MK Ultra projects. I don't feel responsible for what I did in these projects. I'd rather deal with the pleasant experiences with the Pleiadians and the Greys.
How much contact did you have with reptilians?
None, but I question the military is connected with them. Mm-hmm. The reptilians, I've interviewed people with contact with reptilians, and it's pretty horrible, depending on which person. The reptilians like to sometimes they pretend to be with a good group. They like to use the ranking. So when I hear somebody talking to me about their high rank in their abductions, I know it's reptilian. Because the Pleiadians, everything is equal. They believe eye to eye. Their realities are very different. They're fifth dimensional realities. So, and they don't have profit. They have limited trading. They don't have a monetary system, which they feel is the reason we have the greed and the economic problems in our culture here. Everybody's working for the profit motive. The Pleiadians believe we're all one, and equality. When we visit their worlds, they will not let us show aggression. Now, there's a lot of hybrids on Earth that came out, possibly the military project, genetics project, with the Greys, because in the breeding program, we're teleported to the different hybrids' homes, the Pleiadian hybrids' homes. So when the hybrids come into contact with the Pleiadians, they're taught not to use aggression. There is no aggression. When we meet the actual Pleiadians, they're very calm, they're very quiet, they're very accepting, they're very loving. There isn't that negative lower frequency aspect. It's all higher frequencies. And the professor I was working with said something that I didn't believe it when he said it. He said the Earth is going to be loaded with high frequency beings to raise the frequencies of Earth. To me, and so when I'm interviewing contactees, I'm hearing, they remember their past lives. They remember their lives from the systems they're from. And they don't know why they're here. They don't want to be here. This is hell for them.
Right.
And then especially with the introduction of the beatings in childhood, which I think the childhood beatings were purposeful because there's too many that the parents don't remember doing in my interviews. So the parents blanked out, beat the child, came to afterwards. So I continue always to have questions, of course.
Which president do you think this started with?
Okay, it had to have started with Truman. Now, all this information has been removed. When I went into researching in 2000, 2004, a lot of information was available on the internet. Truman was approached by a Walter Stein from Germany. Walter Stein was talking about the UFOs with Hitler. They put that under the occult. It was listed as the occult. And then Truman formed a group called Aegis Prime. Aegis Prime dropped the ship that landed in Roswell. All this information has been scrubbed from the web. And I wish I had kept the documents, but they were stealing documents I was downloading. So they sent a group of 12. They had the Doves. They had two divisions with Aegis Prime. One was called the Doves, and the others was called the Hawks. The Doves were looking for pleasant communications with the Celestials. So 12 were picked to telepathically connect with the Celestials on the top of a mountain. The Hawks had gathered in another location to shoot the ships that responded to the Doves. Most of the Doves died from hemorrhaging. I believe 2 survived, and one ended in a mental institution. I don't know what happened to the other one that survived, but most of them died of convulsions. So when they communicated with the Gray ship came in, and then the Hawks dropped it with them. I don't know exactly how they dropped it, but they dropped the ships that were responding to the invitation. Thus, we have Roswell, the terrorizing of the Roswell witnesses. The first responders, one woman wrote a book about how they terrified her father if he spoke. So the Air Force came in, continued the cycle, and Frank Edwards in his early books of the 60s talks about the conflict with the Air Force and his investigations on sightings. But
what beings were on the craft?
Grays.
They were Greys, absolutely.
They were a form of Greys. I'm not exactly sure, and I believe there was a survivor.
Yes, Ebens. Were they not Ebens? I don't
Yeah,
think they're exactly the same as
they were,
Greys.
and which I'm not sure what they look like. And then there was a journey with the military and Ebens going to their world.
Yes, Serpo.
Yeah, and I was pretty impressed with that. When they came back, there was a question of continuing the journey, but it was stopped in '63.
Two people apparently stayed on planet Serpo.
Yeah, and several died. One died.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it was a
But
very
they were very interested in genetics, the Ebens, apparently.
yeah. They were very interested in definitely our genetics. It was funny in reading the book. They didn't know what they were getting into. The 12 or the ones that volunteered to go to the Ebens, and they spoke different languages and they learned each other's languages.
Yes.
I thought that was that was a book I started reading. There's another book that's come out, which is actually written by some Celestials. It's called The Yellow Book.
Oh, the Yellow Book.
Have you looked at it?
No, but that's not new, is it? And I haven't looked at it.
It's been around with the military for a while.
Mm-hmm. Have you looked at it?
I picked it up and I started reading it. And I became confused because they were describing the organs of the Greys. And the lung and heart was one organ.
That's right.
So then I'm trying to figure, okay, I saw the Greys hybrid project, but then I've been told there's over 100 varieties of Greys. But in the Greys hybrid project, they were coming out, the final ones were looking pretty close to us, or the black-eyed children. And it was unsuccessful initially, and then it became successful. In the beginning, a lot of them were dying. And
you were sickly at first, yes.
The ones that were breeding with the Greys, the survival rate wasn't too good. And the Greys thought it had to do with the lack of spiritual connection. So then the Greys brought the mothers to meet them.
Baby.
And some women responded nicely, others responded pretty violently. Get that thing away from me, I'll kill it. And then I spoke with a woman, a photographer who had several children, and she held the Greys baby. So for some of them, it was a good experience.
Some have good relationships,
Yeah.
with their children,
Yeah. She named her child was April. That was with them, probably because it was born in April. I'm not sure. But so it was quite a conversation I had with her. She's written out several books. I wish I
What
could.
is her name?
April.
To say her name, I can't quite remember it right now, but she worked in Baywatch. She was one of the photographers for Baywatch.
Okay.
And her name will come to me at some point.
Certainly.
But I had an opportunity to speak with her when I was calling her up to buy a book. And I got to hear of a lot of her experiences, which was fascinating. I've seen the babies I've been involved with the Palladian.
Okay.
And
Why do the Palladians need to breed with us?
they are.
Why, I wonder? Just, they can breed on their own.
Terry, the Greys and the Palladians are part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was saying, the military's recruited the women. My mother had memory of participating in the project.
Wow.
But she wouldn't give me information on the phone. Because one of the men that was
Can we interview your mother?
I called her up because one of the men said, one of the men that had been following me for 2 years in a white pickup truck. We collided with rocks. We had a fight. He called me up and I said, you don't know who, I knew who he was, that he was the one following me. And he said, your father is not your father. So I checked the genetics on my father, and my father was my father. My mother wasn't my mother. My birth mother wasn't my mother. I am Scandinavian, 50% Scandinavian, which is Palladian.
That's the Nordics.
The Nordics.
The Nordics is another group. As a Pleiadians told me, they broke off of them many, many, many years ago. But I've interviewed people with encounters with the Nordics. And the Nordics have a tendency to be a little rough, a little gruff. And one woman was explaining me experience. She found herself on their ship in the middle of the night. And they told her that if she touched them, they would kill her. Eventually, in the end, they were talking to one another and they were letting her drive the ship.
Woo!
But they seem to have a harsher exterior than the Pleiadians do.
Okay.
The Eisenhower negotiations.
Yes, I wanted to ask about that because I heard from Paula Harris on somebody else's podcast that Eisenhower met with aliens and they had a
1954
an Egyptian look.
Huh. Yeah, I know the Nordics were there.
Okay.
And the Nordics made an offer of spiritualism, enlightenment. And they were, of course, rejected because the Eisenhower's meeting wanted the technologies for the military.
Yes,
they were more interested in war technologies than they were in man's enlightenment. So nothing happened between the Nordics in that. The Greys made treaties, numerous treaties, and the Greys broke them, which I don't blame them for.
Wow, they certainly did.
Yeah.
Why don't you blame them? You're quite Grey friendly.
It's mixed, but the Greys have been the ones that have physically been doing the surgical work on me. I had a lot of anger with what they did to my girlfriends. Since the 70s, the late 70s, the process in 2010 was described to me by a Grey abductee. They no longer insert the embryo up through the vagina. They found another method of inserting it through the stomach. And the women were much more compliant. And it seemed like the Palladians had concerns with the Greys hybrid program. They felt it was basically horrible. And some of the women they took screamed, yelled, some were quiet. In the regressions, the only time I was ever allowed to go into where they operated was when they took the agent and showed me the electronics in her head. Other than that, I was in a separate room from where they did the women. And some of the women screamed. And so in their darkness, the reason I write the title is In Their Darkness, as many of these women were done with no memory. And so about 12 women would be abducted in my presence with me. The Greys wanted to check the sisters of Nancy, the one with the implant, and so they took 4 of us in a car into the bottom of the ship. I couldn't figure out what the hell was going on in that regression. All I know is
they take the entire car.
They took the entire car
and the occupants up into the ship.
Yeah, the car was taken up with 4 occupants in it. They took the 2 sisters in the back seat. They left the woman in the front seat with me frozen. And then Kenneth, and then I was just sitting in the car. I watched the women turn into silhouettes before they disappeared in the back of the car. They were checking them, I believe, for implants, cerebral implants. When I went to question one of those girls, I was trying to get information on what she knew. And all she said was, I hate them. I hate the ETs. I don't want to, she wouldn't discuss anything with them. That was Nancy's sister. So
too frightening.
What?
Too frightening and painful and frightening.
Well, she wasn't impregnated.
Okay.
I don't believe so. I don't know.
Okay.
But they took 4 of us. Mm-hmm. And I believe they were checking the 2 sisters, Helen, who was 10, and Margaret, who was 16, for implants. They took all 4 of us, and in the hypnosis that became terrifying. And At first, the girls were saying, "Oh, I've never seen a UFO." But then when the UFO pulled the car, everybody just started screaming.
Yeah.
And then we were in total darkness in the car. And then they took the two out of the back seat.
And was okay? So where was the ship? Was it hovering? Was
It
it?
was hovering above the trees.
Wow.
And it took
What did the ship look like?
It was definitely a big ship.
Yeah.
It was a bigger ship than the usual Grays ship. The Grays usually had small ships. And the only abduction I remember was the one that occurred with my sister in 1974.
Okay.
My sister came in from her room into our bedroom to wake my brother up. "There's a ship outside," she was yelling. "There's a ship outside." And so she woke me up, but she could not wake my brother up.
Right.
She was shaking him. So I got up and I said, I was almost laughing. "I got to see this." So I followed her into her room. The room was pink, was lit pink, and I couldn't figure out. And she showed me where the ship was. It looked like a Lost in Space ship. I don't know if you remember the original series. It looked like their ship with the windows around it.
Okay, now you're bringing it back.
And I couldn't understand why it was turning the room pink. My sister described a memory of little men cutting holes in the window before she woke up.
Oh,
that was a screen memory. So then they took me from the bedroom. As I was telling the story, I made up the end. As I was telling it to many people, I made up the end because, the ship lifting up, taking off, but I don't remember the end.
Okay. You just suddenly are back.
I'm in my bed.
Yeah.
And then a similar thing happened with my son. He comes down into the bedroom, and I don't remember. He says, "Dad, there's a ship outside. There's a ship outside." So I follow him up. He says I spaced out, and I don't remember him ever coming. So I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" "I did," he said. Well, he says, "And then you spaced out."
Wow.
So my son had involvement with the Greys as well.
Mm-hmm.
But again, he's not comfortable with discussion.
Sure.
On his experiences. I'm very strong with the horrors of disclosure. The role the military took against its own American citizens, the killing of American citizens. I'm very angry with this government.
How do you feel about the new election?
Trump's dementia seems to be developing. I'm very favorable of Harris.
I like Kamala.
Yeah. The Republicans are going to only work to further decrease abortions.
Yeah.
I believe in a woman's right to control of her body. Giving birth to a child doesn't just end with a pregnancy.
Did you watch the debate?
Yeah, I did.
Oh my gosh.
The people
my gosh.
And the people eating their pets.
Wow. And how you can execute the baby after it's been born.
Yeah, that was his dementia. Yeah, I think we're going to see further dementia with him.
He's lost it.
There's a American Psychiatric Association that wanted him screened because they don't consider him sane. And then I was reading something on the narcissistic personality, how eventually it deteriorates.
It loses sight of itself.
Yeah.
Which must be so shocking to it.
And the reality around it. What Trump believes of his lies, I'm not sure of. What he knows is truth or not truth.
And the Lou Elizondo, did you read his Imminent?
No. What did he say?
He talks about teleportation. I recommend it.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly had enough experiences with the experiences of the Pleiadians have gotten shorter. I used to have some long trips with them. I got a contract on 2 books now, 2 more books.
Okay.
In the next book, I'm going to be concentrating.
Wonderful.
Because I've written a lot of my experiences with them on Facebook. So actually, I'll be going back to Facebook, collecting all of the experiences with the Palladians.
Excellent.
And that'll be in, the book is somewhat started, and I got a contract on it when I get to it after this next book. And that's about celestial interactions is the title.
Fantastic. Well, we're definitely looking forward to all the books.
Yeah,
all of the books.
I think this first book is going to do really well.
I'm excited.
Yeah, it hits on so many aspects. The military's response.
But you must let us know when it comes out, please.
It should be 2 to 3 weeks on Amazon.
Okay, fantastic.
If I get they're supposed to send me 10 copies. I might forward one to you.
That would be so kind. Would you please sign it for us?
Oh, yeah, of course. That's what everybody's asking for.